Morgan, the feature writer for the Marriage Initiative, and I am just so delighted today to introduce Milan and Kay Yerkovich to you. These authors and counselors have worked with couples for the last 30 years using the How We Love concepts they developed, applying attachment theory to the marriage relationship. They've written a How We Love book and workbook and counsel personally and through webinars, conferences, and events. Their Attachment Core Pattern Therapy course trains others how to use the How We Love techniques as they coach or mentor. Kay obtained her master's degree in marriage and family therapy in 1993 after raising their 4 children, while Milan, an ordained minister and pastoral counselor, was leading a church. He then served for 17 years as full-time director of Relationship 180, a nonprofit organization devoted to counseling individuals and families toward healthy relationships. He co-hosts a nationwide counseling radio talk show at New Life Ministries with Stephen Arterburn. Kay and Milan, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having us.
We're delighted, Amy. Thank you. It's a privilege to be asked to be on your show.
Oh, it's just great. Well, let's start at the beginning. What is attachment theory, and how did you guys realize it would apply to adults?
Well, there have been almost now 80 years of research by professionals related to the question of what happens in that early bonding attachment with an infant and their caregiver. And sometimes it goes really well for the caregiver and the infant. And through the formative years, through early childhood, but most specifically and critically in the first 2 years before the child is pre-verbal, or when the child is pre-verbal. And what this means is the child doesn't remember the downloading that's taking place, that is actually putting in set points as to how they feel within relationship. And so there's an imprint that is not cognizant to the person, but it is felt when they're around people in relationship. I feel highly anxious. I feel overwhelmed if emotions flare up, et cetera, et cetera. So it creates an attachment experience that, to answer your question, carries with us throughout our lifetime, unbeknownst to us until it's identified.
So, and how then, I know you said there's been a lot of research about how this applies, with parents and, the parent-child relationship and that sort of thing. How then, because it was kind of new that you've discovered to apply it in a marital relationship. How did you guys come up with that? And we'd love to hear how it works.
Well, the first researchers definitely just looked at the parent, infant, and preschooler bond. And then probably around 98, they started looking more at adult attachment. And that what they realized is that these imprints carry with you into adult relationships. Mm-hmm. What we did is we really looked at how 2 attachment histories collide in a marriage and create a core pattern that is actually quite predictable and quite surprising to people who identify their attachment styles and then read that core pattern because it's the frustrating dance they've been doing in their marriage for years.
And they ask us, how do you know? That this is what we do? That's how predictable it is. So
that's probably where we took it a step further, is just identifying the core patterns of the various combinations, mm-hmm. and helping couples understand. Go ahead.
Well, and in your book too, that's one of the things you do is and you can see what I've done with it. You help people both through your book and also you're on your website. You can take a quiz and kind of discover what your style might be. There is one that's the healthy style, and then some that are not so healthy. It is uncanny how you can talk to somebody and you can pick out their style in just a few sentences, I think, after the years that
it's pretty, after being in the field for 30 years and working with so many people, yes, there's the way people use language, the way, the way they interact with us and with other people, we're pretty quick to be able to pick it up. And, sometimes people are a combination of 2 styles. But what it suggests is just pick the style you do the most in the relationship that you most want to change. And hopefully if you're married, that's your marriage.
Well, you had me dead to rights in just a few minutes, so that was very eye opening. Um, it is worth noting that in the styles, there is one that is the healthy style, and
Right.
that's kind of the growth. That's one of the things that you guys offer in the book too, is kind of a pattern of growth. You don't just have to see your style and go, oh gosh, here I am, this is what it is. There's ways to move forward, correct?
Absolutely. The some fortunate children come off the assembly line of their family of origin with a more secure attachment style. And they can go to people when they need help. They don't have high shame levels of shame. They have a capacity to tolerate the word no, as well as say the word no. They can find themselves going to other people for comfort when they are distressed. And so that would be the secure attachment. And if we wanted a model of the secure attachment, it would look like Jesus in his humanity. He had the capacity to be dependent upon the Heavenly Father and other people. He also had the capacity to lead. Now, if we don't have that, we have one of the attachment styles that do not work well in a relationship, but we can all grow into that secure attachment style. If we didn't get it as a child, we can grow into it with the right work directions so that we can become more secure and these broken attachment styles begin to fade away.
Well, and that's one of the things, you have some exercises and ways to do that in the book. You also have the workbook that is goes into a little more depth. And then you have resources too. You have a small group study for our marriage champions that might be interested in that.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
then also you have is it a 6-hour course as well?
Yeah, there's a 6-hour workshop that we do. We've done around the country and internationally, and that is divided into half an hour segments in the group studies, and there's a private couple study, and then there's a series of questions that you can use to help a group discover their own attachment style and those of their spouse, and even kids and their parents. And then, identify that core pattern and grow out of it. So I think part of the power of the group study is that it takes couples in the group to a deeper level of vulnerability than most Christian Bible studies do, because you're looking at childhood history and you're discussing childhood history, which many people don't think that has anything to do with their current relationship. And it actually has everything to do with their current relationship.
Yeah.
So
Well,
there's a closeness in the group, I'd say.
yeah. Well, and as you're talking about, you alluded to it, there is that core pattern of how, each spouse maybe has their kind of their coping strategy, their love style.
Right.
And then you weave this illustration and this analogy of a dance so
Right.
beautifully in this book, and how when you learned different dance steps and different music
Right.
in your childhood, then you're trying to dance together to different dance, and you explain that. Could you unpack that a little bit more? Because there really is kind of an aha moment for a lot of couples, I would imagine.
I used to have a picture in my office. It was was it the Dance of Love,
Mhm.
something along that line,
Mhm.
and it was a beautiful picture of a couple dancing, and uh, it's a beautiful metaphor because when you see two people that have trained to dance in the same steps, it's a beauty to behold. Couples come in, and the dance steps are less about specific steps they take with their feet. It's more about the reactivity or how they approach relationship and what their expectations, their hopes, their reactivities are, their idealizations, their risk uh, level that they're willing to take in the relationship. And then when they get stressed or triggered, what specific thing do they do? Do they fight and protest when things aren't right? Do they flee like the emotional avoider? Or do they freeze and then try to fix it and make it get better really quickly? Uh, none of these work well in relationship. They bring whatever's happening to a screeching halt. There's usually a blow up, then a silence, and then people sort of remold back together again after a few hours or a few days.
Without resolution.
Without resolution, yeah.
We did that for 15 years. We had a core pattern, and we were frustrated by it, but we didn't understand its roots, and we didn't understand how to change it.
Well, we didn't understand its roots, Kay, you're absolutely right, but we didn't understand precisely what we were doing in that core pattern, what we were each responding to in terms of an emotional reactivity. The emotional reactivity that's built in from our histories is the saboteur.
Yeah. Well, and you explain that too in the book. Not only do you help people come up with their style, but you have a whole section on how the two styles collide.
Right, exactly. And, that's to help people identify, what their core pattern is. And we've diagrammed it in a circular way because, these patterns are circular, and you do this, and then I do that, and then that makes you do this, and then that makes me do that. And depending on the styles colliding, when we diagram it out, people realize this is powerful because this is our frustrating dance. This is the thing that we've done for years. And it's connected to our childhood history. So we like to say your marriage problems didn't really start in your marriage. They started when you were kids. And you just don't understand how that childhood imprint is playing out now in your adult relationships and in parenting too.
Well, and I'm glad that you brought up parenting, because as your parents and as I'm a parent, and how so many of our marriage champions are, we don't want to, I think sometimes people are reluctant to look back because they feel like, you don't want to just blame and shame. A lot of times parents are doing the best with what they can have. And you're quick to point that out in the book too, that it's not just that, some people did have bad parents, but a lot of times people aren't bad parents. They're just, can't give what they don't know that they don't have.
Exactly.
So there's a deficiency that the parent might have. It's not as though they're bad. They can have the greatest intentions in the world.
Yeah.
But we frequently hear of the child who grows up in their home, and the parents never really had conversations with the child. They were very busy doing what they do in life, going to baseball games and supporting all the kids' activities. But to begin to have conversations that explore the inner person, and then to give words to those inner feelings and emotions, and to have dialogue about that, is often missing. And so, as you've already stated, it's not here to blame.
Yeah.
It's here to explain why I react the way I do in my current relationship. And when I could see that my history set me up to be a fearful pleaser that avoided conflict and really I was dishonest in terms of describing myself, or hoping that everything in you was just going to be okay, because if you were okay, I could be okay. And to realize how unhealthy that was. But my parents loved me, but it was a deficiency that I had that was interfering here, and also interfered in my parenting. Because I would be the good cop to the kids, see? And Kay, as the emotionally avoidant person, was a little better able to say no, and she would be the bad cop. And so, you set up that triangulation. So that's how it really plays out even into our parenting.
And you do have a resource, the How We Love for Parents. So,
Yes.
For those who, might really really enjoy this whole journey, they can take it full circle into their parenting. There was something else in the book too, just kind of still on that part about parenting, about you give some examples. And of course, I'm sure you with permission and everything is appropriately, keeping confidentiality, but it was a woman who didn't realize she had been in a traumatic car accident as a child, a pre-verbal child. Like you said, she'd been in the car seat, and she's just been kind of put to the side while they were getting her mother out and taking her mother away in an ambulance. And
Right.
she was a little bitty thing, and nobody was explaining anything to her, and that just set her up, and she never realized her problems with attachment. And it wasn't even that there was a deficit in their parenting style. It was just there was this traumatic incident.
Absolutely. And sometimes, children can endure a lot of trauma if someone sees that that was a hard experience for the child. And even if they're pre-verbal, they understand a 1-year-old understands a lot of spoken language. They just can't speak back yet. So if someone's explaining and watching for signs of distress or regression and, helping that child through it, they can fare quite well. But in this case, nobody really recognized that this child was traumatized by not only the absence of her mom, who broke her pelvis and was in the hospital for a number of days. So mom was there, and then all of a sudden mom was gone. And there was no explanation, no help through that. And so all kinds of things happen in our world that can impact our bond with our parents that have nothing to do with the parents' skills. It's just bad things happen to families.
And as a result, Amy, later in life, even as a child, adolescent, and a newly married, she was very separation sensitive.
Yeah.
So if a person averted their gaze, wasn't paying attention to them, if this person found themselves all of a sudden all alone and didn't know where people were, they would get triggered and alarmed, and they would begin to show an exaggerated stress response that definitely interfered with the marriage, and could then also create a helicopter mom where I'm not going to take my eyes off my kids, and I'm not going to allow them to explore the way they need to without chasing them to protect them. So it carries with us. This isn't to cause fear, it's to bring enlightenment, so we can be loving, Philippians 1:9, with more knowledge and all discernment.
Well, and it made so much sense when she realized what had happened, and then could, use the growth steps to move forward. I know another thing that that kind of all goes back to the first question is your comfort question.
Mm-hmm.
Could you explain that? Because you obviously see in that example how it wasn't answered. But I think people will get that better when you explain what the comfort question is.
Well, we asked this question in the book and in our workshops. Do you have a memory of comfort when you were growing up where a parent really noticed you were distressed, could identify that you weren't okay, and sought you out and, like Milan was saying earlier, listened on a level that helped you identify feelings and emotions and your own stress response to that event, and then help you through it in a way where you felt relief at the end of that encounter. And relief comes when someone really connects to us in our pain and helps us process it with words, so that we learn to have words for our internal experiences. And then we learn that people provide relief. And if we don't have those memories of comfort, and Milan didn't, and I didn't in our childhood homes, we had no idea really how to identify or go to each other for comfort. If I was stressed, I got by myself because that's what I did as a kid. When he got stressed, he chased me around asking if I was okay, instead of really realizing that he was the one that wasn't okay. So, these are things that the comfort question is very diagnostic, because it helps people understand, do they go to people when they're not okay? Is it safe to go to people? Is vulnerability okay? Is it comfortable to be vulnerable, or is it scary and risky?
And if they don't know how to go to people, what happens then is they go to other things to make the difficult feelings on the inside go away. And this quite often is the genesis of addiction. So people are just trying to make the unpleasantness and the discomfort on the inside dissipate, go away, disappear. So that happens pretty well if I get drunk. That happens pretty well.
Yeah, they work. All addictions work temporarily. They
Yeah.
just have a price tag on them.
Yeah.
And so
ultimately they're destructive to a relationship.
Right.
And that not knowing how, like you had said, even just the words, as someone, okay, since you mentioned that being an avoider, which is one of the love styles,
Right.
you didn't even have the words to explain your emotions. And you guys have a resource that helps with that. It's just even just one of your freebies on your website, right?
Yes, we do. We
It's
do.
called the Soul Word List, and it's a list of emotions that are common to us as human beings. And to that, I would add that we're made in the image and likeness of God, and God is a highly emotional God. And so he's the one that is cognitive and emotional, and he made us just like that. Yet often in the church, we tend to ignore the emotional side of how we're created in the image and likeness of God. So to have emotional intelligence is really important. And the ability to describe your soul and share it with others like Jesus did the night before he died. He said, "My soul's distressed to the point of death. Come watch and pray with me." Really critical to be able to self-assess, ask for help, be vulnerable, and pull people alongside of you, and then also have vertical support with the Lord. It was a multifaceted approach to managing with stress.
Yeah, and you're right. I couldn't do that at all. As
I
an
couldn't do
avoider, no one asked me and my family ever what I felt. In
No.
fact, I got in trouble if I cried. My dad said, "You better stop crying. I'll give you something to cry about." And my mom got very anxious if I showed emotion. So avoiders just learn to dismiss emotions, ignore them until they're not even aware of them.
And this isn't about gender. A lot of people think the emotionally avoidant person is the male, but these attachment styles are not about gender. So this isn't a male-female difference. This is your attachment style, which is because attachment, who made that? God did, and it's a universal experience for all infants. And if it goes well, the child has a better chance throughout life. If it doesn't go so well, the person has a less positive chance of being able to be successful in life until they decide to work on that deficiency.
That was one of the things you mentioned, was your marriage is only as hard or easy as your childhood.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's such an important concept. It's very unfair because, of course, when you're counseling people, they often had difficult childhoods and they may not even know that initially. They're like, "Oh, it was fine." They've dismissed the things that were hard and difficult as, "Well, I'm grown up now, so it doesn't matter." And they don't always recognize the impact and the power of those experiences to formulate how they relate as adults. But these things are all changeable. But if you had a very difficult childhood, you're going to have, not only do you have less positive skills to take into adulthood relationships or adult relationships, but you also have wounds, and mostly usually unresolved. Many people grow up and have a lot of unresolved wounds. And part of what we helped each other do as we begin to really be honest about those wounds, we learn to comfort each other with those words.
We had to learn to talk to each other on an emotional level. And it scared us at first because it was nothing we'd ever done and we're not used to. So we had to learn to, and that's what the comfort circle is in the last third of the book. It's how to learn to have conversations that is guided with constructive questions to help people get through it. Because most couples just start talking, they put 12 things on the table, they start piling up, and then boom, it's over with, and they have an explosion. And to use the word you used earlier, Kay, everything's left unresolved. And so, if that keeps going on, all you're doing is circle, rinse, repeat, and you're just doing it over and over and over again.
Well, I think that's so important that you are saying about how, if you don't know how to resolve things in relationships, if you didn't learn comfort from other people, whether you learned it by reading a book or turning towards, addiction or whatever it was, if you didn't learn comfort in people, that's going to totally butt heads in your marital relationship. And so it's something that you teach people how to do. And you have some videos too, even of what a comfort circle looks like,
Right.
because there's kind of there's a process, right? There is actually a kind of a template. Can you explain it a little bit more?
Sure. Yes. The comfort circle is basically a biblically driven circle of communication, of being aware, self-aware, knowing I'm stressed or recognizing someone else's stress, engaging. And then the hardest part for people is listening and finding out more and staying in the listener role for 10, 15, 20 minutes. And what we've learned is that people don't know how to listen. They don't know how to stay in the listener role. They just react to what they heard with their own defensiveness or their own version of the story. And the comfort circle has a template where you ask your spouse a series of 12 questions on any given subject so that you really learn to stay in the listener role and listen to the response you're hearing. And we each actually have couples write down what they're hearing, so that at the end they can go back and say, okay, this is everything I heard. And if you ask 12 questions and you don't write it down, you're probably not going to remember everything you heard. So the template is to help people learn to stay in the listener role. And they're always shocked at what they find out that they had no idea was going on in their spouse when they learn to do that. And then resolution can be so much easier when we've taken the time and we know how to really listen on a deep level.
Yeah, to that point, Kay, rarely is the present issue on the table the full story. We need to understand what's the backstory to the current difficulty, conflict, dislike,
Or reaction.
reactivity. What's going on underneath that? What's the backstory? So this takes us into history. And I like to remind our listeners that God is a God of history, hence our Old Testaments that we have in our Bible. We wouldn't understand the New Testament if we didn't have the Old Testament to give us the understanding as to the New Testament, the coming of the Messiah, the salvation, and the completion of the story. So it's important for us to look back. And so that's why, and then the comfort word comes from the commands of the scripture to comfort one another, encourage one another, bear one another's burdens, pray for one another, confess your sins to one another, etc. There's dozens of these horizontal commands that we don't know how to do well.
And one of the reasons, as you point out, is that if we don't even know if we don't even have the words to express what we would want somebody else to do for us, we're not telling anybody. We don't even know. And so how in the world can they do that? So I think that your How We Love resources really could spark some growth in any church or any small group that would be really beneficial to helping people connect on a more relational level.
Right.
Even just sharing that question, the question, I was chatting with a friend earlier this morning, telling her about that I was going to be talking to you. And I mean, this is a person who has no attachment whatsoever to you or knowing. Mm-hmm. And I asked her your comfort question. Do you remember a time as a child when you were comforted? And she smiled and she said, oh yeah, lots. Yeah. Well, this is a woman who's been married for more than 30 years and she has a relationship, and that's no surprise.
Absolutely. Yep. And I always even like to ask more about, well, what do you remember, and like what were those experiences like, so we can really see if they have the qualities of being deeply listened to. But if she's got, she's just gonna have an easier time in marriage, because she's learned that people are a source of comfort, and whether you're the avoider or the pleaser or the vacillator or the controller or the victim, these are the broken styles, and they all have difficulty with comfort, with emotional connection, and even with grieving. They aren't able to go back and grieve those unresolved hurts, because those defenses are in place,
and they have a hard time asking.
And they each have a hard time asking directly for what they want or need, mm-hmm. or even knowing. I didn't even know what I wanted or needed. I mean, when I finally started to learn what I felt, I remember one day he said, well, what do you need? And I'm like, I get to need something? I have no clue. So it was a growth process. But all I can tell you is when we fought through those hard changes, and they're uncomfortable because you're having to do something completely different than you did as a child. The end result was a level of freedom and bonding that I didn't even know was possible. So we just want to encourage your listeners to, your viewers, to really realize that, help is possible, change is possible.
Yeah, that's like you mentioned that when the pain of the status quo is more than the pain of the change, then ready to move forward. And I can just see so much application for how this could really open up some doors for great relationship and connection within groups and marriages and people.
Yeah.
Amy, we hear that every day from all over the world. People tell us this was a game changer for them. And it's just, we're honored that that's the case and we're humbled by it. But it is proving to be very true.
Yeah. God took us on a faithful journey and answered prayers as to something's broken and we don't know what. And so our work is a result of our own journey with the Lord. And, it was his design.
Yeah.
And his revelation for different things.
Showing us new things that we didn't know.
Yeah.
Oh, well, Milan and Kay, I have found this to be so insightful, and I know our listeners have too. It's just a delight to get to talk to you. Thank you so much for being here.
You're so welcome. All right. God bless you.
It's our pleasure. Thank you, Amy.
Oh, absolutely. And as always, Marriage Champions, if you'd like to get in touch with us and find out more about Milan and Kay, you can reach us at marriageinitiative.org.